Cleveland Browns really do have Shedeur Sanders as QB4 during minicamp, they're making a big-time mistake. I'll explain on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso, with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Lauren Cox. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Jaire Alexander finally being cut by the Green Bay Packers and where he could go next. Talk about what's going on at quarterback with the Indianapolis Colts, but we'll start with some drama in Cleveland and something that I think is just absolutely ridiculous. Before we dive into all of it, though, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. So, Lauren, where I want to start is sort of mandatory mini camps are this week, and there are some mysteries out there in the NFL that I want to take a look at. And one of the mysteries is, do the Cleveland Browns really have Shedeur Sanders at the bottom of the depth chart? And I'm sorry, but if that's the case, I think it would be a massive mistake. I think when you look at the long-term upside of the player financially and talent-wise, and then you look at the competition that's on the depth chart, it's hard for me to envision Shedeur Sanders being the fourth best quarterback on that roster.
But who do you put below him functionally right now? Do you put Flacco at the bottom? Pickett, who you just traded for, or Gabriel, who you drafted before Sanders? Like, it's a tricky spot.
It is a tricky spot for the Browns. I have my answer to that. He's definitely above Dillon Gabriel, and I'm giving him a great opportunity to get as many reps as Kenny Pickett, because I think that Kenny Pickett is a comparable player to Shedeur Sanders. Sanders is just younger, more upside, cheaper, more team control. But let's go to my guy Spencer from Locked On Browns to give us his take on where Shedeur Sanders is right now on the depth chart.
And I get the sense that the Browns are not planning or expecting Shedeur Sanders to be the week one starter for this team. And listen, again, I give the caveat that things can obviously change. A lot can change between now and September 7th when the season actually kicks off at Huntington Bank Field with the Cincinnati Bengals. I recognize that, and I don't take that lightly. Like, we still have all of training camp to get through. We have mandatory minicamp next week. A lot of context is going to be added to the situation. But based on these first couple weeks of the offseason program, where we've seen how they've handled these quarterbacks, and it's, again, I want to be clear. This is nothing that Shedeur has done wrong per se. I don't like he is with the opportunities he's been given, he's made the most of them. And that's why I'm saying, like, there is a chance he climbs up this depth chart and he makes a name for himself and he stands out even in the preseason or training camp. There's going to be an opportunity for him to do those things. But just based off of right now, how this room has been handled and how they're managing the reps and where those are kind of going and how they're dispersing them and the order of the quarterbacks, it feels like Shedeur Sanders is fourth in the pecking order, and it's going to take a lot for him to get up to be the top guy in the eyes of the Cleveland Browns.
Again, I'm sorry, but it's just patently absurd. What are we doing here? Where in the world? Find somebody who had Dillon Gabriel as a better quarterback than Shedeur Sanders pre-draft. Like, how long can the dog and pony show continue for the Browns where they pretend like Dillon Gabriel is a better prospect and a better player and the long-term future for the Browns? Like, again, he should be battling with Kenny Pickett for QB2 right now. I think doing this thing it's sad to me that Shedeur Sanders' career is going to be caught in the crosshairs of a battle between ownership and the front office in Cleveland, which in my opinion is exactly what it is and what it's been the entire time and what the pick of Dillon Gabriel was. So I just think it's insane for the Browns, who are desperate for a quarterback answer, desperate for a little bit of buzz this season where they look like a team dead in the water. Like, the best thing that could happen to them is for Shedeur Sanders to go out there and play, and giving him QB4 reps. Lauren, you've covered NFL training camps. You know that there are a lot less reps to go around than maybe your normal NFL fan, even locked-in fan realizes. Like, the QB4 may get 3 or 4 reps an entire practice, if that. So if that's your plan to develop Shedeur Sanders and you're giving substantially more reps to Kenny Pickett and to Dillon Gabriel, like, it's just nonsense to me.
Do you think any of this could be intentional of sort of saying like, because they know the sort of the Sanders, everything else around him, that put him as QB4, not necessarily like to humble him per se, but to just kind of like push this down and delay this in the future, because they know that if they put Sanders in there now, it's all anybody will be talking about. And if you can kind of let this blow over for a little while and then maybe work his way back up in the future, then it's less of a firestorm of attention of, ooh, Shedeur is going to start, you know?
See, I understand that, the quote unquote, like, earn it. We didn't hand it to him. They don't want to seem like they favored him in any way. But that was out the window with the draft process. Like, it's clear you didn't favor him. Most people think that the owner forced you to take him. So I think that it's kind of like a cutting off your nose to spite your face situation. Like, I feel this way about the Titans with Cam Ward too, when they were saying we're splitting reps evenly. Yeah, that can only go on so long before you making the player earn it is actually just hurting your football team to get the best version of your football team. Now, the Titans have moved away from that. Cam Ward is getting the lion's share of the reps now. I don't expect Shedeur Sanders to be moved up all the way to number 1 or anything, but you're not giving him a fair chance to develop and be what he could be for you when you're keeping him at QB4 and the limited opportunities he's going to get there. So I just think, no matter what, if that's really the case, and it sounds like it is because Spencer is there, he knows his stuff, I just think that's a terrible way to develop a guy who's clearly has the highest upside of any quarterback on your roster currently.
And really, it starts to hurt everybody in the QB depth chart.
Yes.
If Sanders is taking some of Gabriel's number 3 reps, and Gabe's getting less of those, and if Gabriel's competing with Pickett, then Pickett's getting less of those, and if Pickett's competing with Flacco, like, everybody loses reps when you have to spread them around 4 people instead of just having a really solid set 3 that you're locked in on.
And at the end of the day, what are we doing? Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett need to be ready. Like, this isn't 2 years ago. I don't see the 11-5. It's not just Joe Flacco. It's the roster. The Browns roster is not as good as it was 2 and 3 years ago, where they looked like they had one of the best rosters and they just needed a quarterback. Now it's getting closer to the opposite, where they don't have the roster. They have a couple of good players, of course, but they don't have the roster that they need to contend either. And I feel like some people are, still thinking 2 years ago, like, the Browns roster is good. Flacco could maybe, like, no, the roster is not good enough for Joe Flacco to take them anywhere. Kenny Pickett is not good enough to take the roster anywhere. Like, I don't know. I guess you could say they want to be as competitive as possible, and they should, but you got to have just a modicum of reality as well. And to have Shedeur Sanders QB4 it's losing the plot to me. They've jumped the shark.
Do you think Kevin Stefanski is feeling a hot seat at all there, saying like, yeah, maybe I'd like to develop a quarterback in the long term, but I got to win 7-8 games this season to keep my job. So let me go with the veteran Flacco or maybe Pickett to just kind of say, hey, keep the boat afloat, because I don't have time to worry about who's starting in 2026 or 2027. I got to keep my job right now.
Yeah, and listen, that would be the other side of the argument, but I guess what I would present back to the jury is that I don't even know if you're going to win 6 or 7 games with Joe Flacco. Like, I don't know if that's obtainable at all, and I'm sure Kevin Stefanski is thinking that's obtainable. Like, of course, that's how, but at some point, like, you shouldn't be thinking that. You shouldn't be thinking, oh, I can keep my job if I just start Joe Flacco. Like, in whose economy? You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? So I guess if that's the case, that may be the case, but I think that's as misguided as any other. There is no path to Shedeur Sanders being QB4 and getting QB4 reps and mandatory minicamp and then into training camp for me that isn't misguided, I guess. I can't find one.
Yeah, I think the thing I think we forget about Joe Flacco is, right, it's not just, he's not like a 35-year-old quarterback. He's 40. Like, this is not like an older quarterback. It's like he's a senior citizen as far as NFL quarterback goes. Like, this is not, you're not going to tap into some, Joe Flacco young magic. Like, yeah, you know what you're getting, and that's, there's a consistency there, but a really low ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, in my opinion, if you're, we talk about Kevin Stefanski's job security, I think 5 or 6 wins with Shedeur Sanders might buy you more, especially if the owner is the one who mandated that you go take Sanders. It would prove him right, and you'd be like, hey, boss, here's your guy. We did it. He looked pretty good. Shedeur Sanders with 5 or 6 wins, to me, gives you a better chance of keeping your job than Joe Flacco with 6 or 7, like, or Kenny Pickett. I guess that's the debatable point. Maybe people wouldn't agree with that, but that's where I'm at on that. And if you want to talk about a debate, there was a debate about who should start at quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, but Anthony Richardson looks like he's doing Anthony Richardson stuff again, and that debate might be over. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending, all in one place. Stop just managing your money, folks, and start building your wealth. For me personally, I didn't realize how much money I was spending on online shopping. I get the Monarch Money app, and now I can budget smarter and save more. And instead of having multiple apps that I got to juggle, I have one that lets me check my finances, track my spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Browns' plan at quarterback and why I think it's complete nonsense. But now we got to talk about another quarterback situation that, in most eyes, may seem very nonsensical as well, and it's the Indianapolis Colts. And coming into the year, the Colts had signed Daniel Jones. Anthony Richardson had all those issues last year, tapped himself out of the game, which got him benched, and had, some other injury concerns, which he's had a lot of problems with. And now we're right back there again. Anthony Richardson looks to have some injury issues. I'll throw it to my guy, Jake Arthur from Locked On Colts, to break down the latest news.
Anthony Richardson, the surgically repaired shoulder that he had as a rookie back in 2023, he experienced some pain in it during practice last Thursday. So essentially they have elected to put him on the shelf for the rest of this week, as well as next week's 3-day mandatory minicamp. And obviously that is a gigantic setback for this, in the short term, this quarterback competition between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. But also, let's just call it what it is. Availability is the best ability. And that was already like half of the reason the Colts needed to bring in Daniel Jones in the first place to compete with Anthony. And we didn't even get to training camp this year. And I think the most disconcerting thing is this isn't a new injury for Anthony. It's a re-aggravation of something from 2 years ago. Basically, how Shane Steichen described it is it just flared up from, repetitive use over time. So quarterback's got to throw the ball. He rehabbed that thing pretty thoroughly last year. There were no issues with it last year, really. So they thought this was something that was going to be in the rearview mirror. So again, he's out indefinitely. There's really no timetable put on this. They do hope to have him back by training camp or within some time in training camp.
I mean, it seems like the fight's already over. Daniel Jones might have already been the favorite because of the inconsistency. It's crazy to look at Daniel Jones as the consistency guy in the battle of quarterbacks, but I think Daniel Jones might have had a lead already with Richardson. This might be the nail in the coffin for him having an opportunity to be a starter with the Colts.
Yeah, and it just sucks because it feels like it'd be nice if you were just saying, well, he's just not playing well enough, and you could feel like you've gotten a concrete answer on his ability as a quarterback, but we haven't even gotten to go that far with Richardson. Like, right. Yes, it was obviously rough a lot of the time in there, but one of the things I think we underestimate is like how much you miss, like when you're injured, not only are you missing like games, but you're missing development too. You don't get that time to get better. And so Richardson is missing that time now to be able to get better. And Daniel Jones is out there. And as much as I don't think Daniel Jones is some kind of solution, he's the guy who's there. I mean, I don't know. Is Riley Leonard a dark horse possibility here just to pop up and give you something different? Because don't we kind of know what Daniel Jones is at this point too?
Yeah, and that's where I think it gets a little scary for Colts fans. In my honest opinion, the Colts have just really botched the development of Anthony Richardson. Everybody seemed to agree that he was a guy who needed some time. He needed to develop. It was going to take a minute. He was a young player, 13 starts in his last 18 months or something like that coming out of college. They took him really, really high, and it was going to take a long time. And I think they were in that spot where like, hey, we've cycled through these veteran quarterbacks. They didn't get it done. We're going to take a chance on a young guy and develop him. And then they just didn't have have the patience to do it. He probably shouldn't have been starting week 1 for the Colts in his rookie season. And then, obviously the situation last year had to rattle his confidence as a player, getting pulled in and out of the lineup and the reason that he got pulled out. So I just think they've really done a disservice to him throughout. He may never be able to rebound from it because his body just won't let him. But either way, it's a bad job by the Colts. And you asked the question, we know what Daniel Jones is. What's the ceiling for the Colts now? Like, when you look at the Colts, if we say right now, okay, Daniel Jones is their starter, obviously they have some good pieces, and Tyler Warren, who they drafted out of tight end, Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce is an okay trio of wide receivers. Maybe Adonai Mitchell can finally step up and be a playmaker for them. Their offensive line is pretty solid. Bernard Raymond and Quentin Nelson, some questions now and some changes, but Braden Smith's been solid. The defense has been pretty bad the last few years, but they finally went out and spent and got Shavarius Ward and Cam Bynum in the secondary. Like, with Daniel Jones, what do you think the Colts are in 2025?
Yeah, it feels like they're not far from the team that Daniel Jones took to the playoffs with the Giants. I mean, that was not an impressive Giants team. They won 9 games that year, but It was enough to sneak into the postseason. I think they won a playoff game that year too. Like, they have enough of a.
They beat Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, if Daniel Jones just doesn't screw it up, then you can sort of trip and stumble your way to 8 or maybe even 9 wins here and be lingering on that conversation. It's just going to be tough in that NFC East right now with the Eagles and the Commanders looking so good, and then we'll see how good the Cowboys are. Like, they might just have a more difficult path this time than what Daniel Jones was. Or excuse me, I'm putting back on the Giants. I'm ahead.
Right.
It's gonna be much easier. It's gonna be much easier in the AFC South with the Titans still on the upswing and the Jaguars are turning things over and figuring out there might be a path there towards getting back to the playoffs.
It could remind me of the Carson Wentz year, where you have a pretty decent roster around him, but you have a guy who makes some mistakes, can be a little inconsistent here and there, and they're a competitive team, but not quite good enough to actually, make some noise or anything like that. The one thing I would say is, though, those years, they had a much better defense than what their defense is now. And maybe they're able to turn things around. I guess it's a possibility that they could do that and be a better defense this year. They have Lou Anarumo coming in from Cincinnati, who's been a pretty solid defensive coordinator, but his Cincinnati teams have fallen off in the last few years. And I guess I am not 100% certain that this Indianapolis Colts defense is significantly more talented than what the Bengals defenses have been. They have a lot of question marks on that defense and a lot of guys who really got to step forward. So I see the Colts as like a team that could probably go 7-10, maybe 8-9 at max, but I think it's more likely that they're 7-10 or 6-11 even is where I would put them, with their floor being 5-12. That's kind of where I see them in the grand scheme of things, even with Daniel Jones.
They said they found a way to get to 8 last year with an injured Anthony Richardson and then 39-year-old Joe Flacco, who we just talked about. If the supporting cast is a little bit better, I think Daniel Jones can be sort of where Flacco was for them last season, or you compare him to Wentz, that can be in that division. It can be 7-8, maybe even pushing 9 wins if things really go the way of Daniel Jones really settles in and locks in. But it's hard to be optimistic about any kind of big run or anything coming out of this. It's more just getting you by the next offseason when you need to really find your long-term quarterback solution.
And ultimately, what we really have to see is how the interior of that offensive line plays out. I mentioned the 3 guys who I like on their offensive line, but you look at Tanner Bortolini, they lose Ryan Kelly, who's been up and down and been injured lately, but Will Fry's got a big contract from the Minnesota Vikings to go up there. I think Kelly, both of them went to Minnesota this year, so they lose 2 key pieces. Having such a good offensive line, I think, allowed them to still win despite the inconsistent quarterback play and the injuries that they suffered. When you see the offensive line deteriorate just a little bit, I'm not saying that they can't be as good as they were last year, but it's just a question that I want to see. Tyler Warren, they've been needing a big answer at tight end, so that can make a big difference. I can see a path to them, being 8-9, maybe 9-8, I guess, could be, but I have a hard time seeing much better than that with Daniel Jones. But looking at a team who I do see being much better, who lost a key piece today, the Green Bay Packers and Jaire Alexander finally got their long-awaited breakup. We're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers cutting Jaire Alexander, but I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen. For your second listen today, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. As training camp gets closer, moves are being made. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So Jaire Alexander and the Green Bay Packers have been off and on for, it feels like, over a year now. It went back into last season. There was some bad feelings. And then this year you're hearing that they're looking to trade him. Honestly, what was it? Just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we heard reports that he's probably just going to stay on the team. But we finally get the news that they are cutting Jaire Alexander. He's going to be a free agent. I want to throw it back to my guy, Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers, out traveling the world at the moment. But a couple of weeks ago, when we heard that Jaire Alexander would likely be staying with the Packers, Peter reacted to that, and he said some interesting things that apply, even though we know that he was cut now.
It's looking more and more like Jaire Alexander is going to be a Green Bay Packer in 2025. If he is, it will raise Green Bay's ceiling more than any move any other NFC contender made this offseason. It's really great for the Packers that they were able to have a very good defense without Jaire Alexander, that they were able to blanket the Philadelphia Eagles receivers without Jaire Alexander. And what I have been consistent with all offseason is they don't need Jaire Alexander to be a good defense in 2025. That remains true. If they get him back, though, it helps a lot. I don't know if you know that about having good players. It helps a lot. But if they didn't, if they shipped him out or just cut him or whatever, if he was not on the team, I would say, I think this can be a top 10 defense in 2025. We know how good this defense can be without Jaire Alexander. We didn't even really get to see this defense with Ja. Now, I was also someone saying last season that Jaire Alexander's level of play had slipped a little bit. Not from really good player to bad player by any means, but from arguably the best cornerback in the league in 2020 to borderline top 10 corner. On the other hand, having that borderline top 10 corner versus not, even if you're only going to get him for 8 or 10 games, is really useful. That's what Jaire Alexander can be. A player who in the biggest games is the differentiator between winning a game against the 49ers and losing it.
So I get what Peter's saying. They had a very good defense without having a lot of Jaire Alexander last year. But at the end of the day, I want to hit on that last point that he mentioned, that he could be a differentiator. I think the Green Bay Packers are a very good young roster with a very good coach, but they are lacking those veteran, experienced playmakers who make the biggest plays in the biggest moments. So often when you watch the Packers, they make the big mistake in the big moment. They miss the extra point. They make the special teams blunder. They make the turnover. They miss the tackle. They get the big penalty. The Green Bay Packers are one of the younger teams in the NFL, and they continue to look like it when they lose their big games and they don't step up in big moments like we saw from them last year when they played their toughest opponents. So to me, I think they need players like this. Cutting Jaire Alexander and getting the situation over with, I like, because I just want finality and clarity as we move into the actual important parts of the offseason. But I have a hard time looking at this Green Bay Packers depth chart with Keshawn Nixon as your top cornerback. I don't know that he's good enough to be a top cornerback. Nate Hobbs they bring in, good player, but is that the difference maker that we're talking about here? You have Carrington Valentine or Kalen King as a guy who can now step in for Jaire Alexander. I just don't think that the Packers have enough at cornerback and have enough playmakers in general, veteran playmakers, to change games. They don't have enough this year still to be a team that I'm looking at, and I liked them last year, and I'm learning from that mistake. I don't see the Green Bay Packers as a Super Bowl contender this year because they just don't have the next level of players. They have that really good level. They don't have the great players who make the big plays in the big moment. They're hoping Matthew Golden is that, but I had Matthew Golden as wide receiver 4 personally, so I don't see that there either.
Yeah, I think we got flashes of that from Xavier McKinney and even the rookie safety next to him, Evan Williams, on the back end there.
Yeah, they're great.
But I'm with you there at the cornerback spot where it's like they have 3 players right now that played NFL defensive snaps last season at cornerback: Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs. And Hobbs is a player who, much like Jaire Alexander, has a ton of injury history. Hasn't started a full season in the last 3 years in a row. So if he gets hurt at some point, then you're really scratching the surface or getting down there with former 7th round picks trying to step into bigger roles on that back end. You can hide a bad cornerback here or there, but once you start having multiple holes in there, it's pretty tricky, especially as you're still waiting for that pass rush to take another step forward with Lucas Van Ness can get there. And I know Rashawn Gary's great, Kenny Clark's great, but like they still want that other edge rusher to really step up and take over. So if you have secondary, if you have corner questions and some pass rush questions, like there's enough there to be like, yeah, they'll be a good team, but maybe not that, that sleeper Super Bowl team.
So look at what the Packers do at wide receiver, how they kind of moneyball wide receiver. They don't have it. They got rid of Devontae Adams and they're like, hey, we're going to draft a bunch of them in the top 4 rounds. We're just going to get a bunch of them, bunch of different types. And we're going to we have 7 or 8 guys that we can all rotate through. So we'll always have a decent group, but they don't have, like Josh Jacobs pointed out this year, they didn't have the one guy who is a true number 1 wide receiver dominant guy. They didn't have that. I think that's a microcosm of the larger issue for the Packers, where they try to ham and egg their way because they're so good at ham and egging. They're great at drafting, they're great at developing, they have a great process. So they know, hey, we have 4 or 5 B and C level cornerbacks. Hey, we have a good rotation on the defensive line with a bunch of different pieces that we can rotate in, and the Kingsley Egbanares of the world, and the Carl Brooks, and you go and you look at not Jaden Reed at wide receiver, who I think is probably their best wide receiver, but the Malik Heaths, what I mean, like Romeo Dobbs is just a good guy. They have like 3 or 4 of those dudes at every single spot on the offensive line, other than Elgton Jenkins. They don't have any offensive lineman who's like, oh, that's a clear superstar top offensive lineman. It's like they're getting it done with Rasheed Walker, and they're going to bring Anthony Belton in there, and he's going to be solid. And like they just always try to ham and egg their way to anything without having high-level elite players. And that works, but I think to take the next step as a team for them of what they've been the last couple of years with Jordan Love, to take that next step, they do need some of those big-time superstars. And when you cut Jaire Alexander, I get it, because he's been inconsistent and the injuries and not as the same player like Peter said, but you're going the opposite direction of what I think they need to do to take the next step, no matter whether it's justified or not.
Yeah, 2 quick things on that. One is like, it's been tough for them to get those superstars because they had a bunch of money tied up in Alexander, who's hurt all the time, and then a bunch of money tied up in David Bakhtiari, who was hurt all the time. So like they had all this money just kind of sitting there on the books that wasn't getting good players. But now that they release Jaire Alexander, they freed about $17 million in cap space. They have over $35 million right now in salary cap space. That sure seems like enough money to trade for Trey Hendrickson and give him a new contract extension, right? Like they've got some
Jalen Ramsey
to make a big splash. One of these big splashes, they seem like a prime candidate for something to try and put them over the top the way you say they need one.
And I agree with you. They are in a good position to do that, but it's the Green Bay Packers. Do they really, how often have they really done things like that? I agree with you. I would like to see them make a move because I think, right now is the time to strike. You should do it. The team's pretty good, but will they? It is out of character. So I guess we'll have to see what they do. I'm sure the Bears don't want to see the Packers add any more talent.
Well, whatever they do, you can be sure it will be compared to Reggie White 10,000 times. So get used to it.
Yeah, you won't be wrong about that. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, with my co-host, Lauren Cox. As I tell you every episode, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there.